A young mother struggling to survive cooked something to eat for her elderly and lonely neighbor without imagining what she would do. The icy wind whistled through the narrow cobblestone streets of the neighborhood, making the windows of the houses rattle. Clara Gutierrez was in the kitchen of her small apartment, stirring a pot of black beans. Her gaze was lost among the bubbles appearing on the surface of the broth, but her mind was elsewhere, calculating and recalculating the week's expenses. From the corner of the living room, Tomas, her son, played with a plastic truck he had found at a flea market months ago. The boy made engine noises with his mouth, but from time to time, he glanced over at his mother. "Mom, is dinner ready?" he asked, pausing the truck noises and approaching the kitchen doorway. "Not yet, my love. Just a few more minutes," Clara replied, looking at the pot as if trying to make it boil faster with the strength of her will. The day had been long, and Clara felt the weight of every hour on her body. The bakery where she worked, known for its tamales and conchas, hadn't had a good sales day, and when sales were bad, so was her pay. That afternoon, she had received an envelope with less money than expected, and her mind kept doing math to stretch the little she had until the following week. Tomas returned to his corner, but Clara knew her son was more aware of her mood than he let on. Since her husband had abandoned them years ago, Tomas had become her greatest support, even though he was only 7. He was a bright child, always smiling. But lately, she had noticed he asked less about things he wanted or needed, as if he already understood there wasn't much to ask for. Clara turned off the stove and served a couple of plates of beans with a piece of bread she had brought from the bakery. Although she tried to smile as she handed the plate to her son, her thoughts continued to torment her. How would she make it to the end of the month? What would happen if things got worse? As she sat by the dining room window, her gaze drifted toward the house across the street. It was a colonial mansion with stone walls and a large wooden gate that looked as heavy as her own life. The facade was worn by time, and vines covered part of the walls. Although she had passed by that house her entire life, Clara had never crossed its threshold. Doña Elena lived there, a woman she only knew by sight. The elderly lady always walked slowly to the market or the mailbox, dressed in a long coat and a hat that barely revealed her face. Sometimes the neighbors whispered things about her, that she was alone, that she had been widowed many years ago, and that she never received visitors. But no one seemed to know much more. "Why are you looking at that house, Mom?" asked Tomas between bites. "I was thinking about the neighbor," she replied, distracted. "The lady who always walks slowly. That one," Clara said, pouring herself a glass of water. The boy didn't respond, but looked at her curiously before returning to his plate. Clara sighed and sat across from him. They ate in silence, but her mind kept drifting to the mansion across the street. When they finished dinner, Clara gathered the plates and took them to the sink. As she washed, the sound of hot water hitting the dishes brought back memories of her mother. Her mother always said the same thing: kindness costs nothing, but sometimes it changes everything. Clara looked toward the window again. The wooden gate of the house remained closed, and there wasn't a trace of light coming from the first-floor windows. It was as if the house were frozen in time. Without thinking too much, she made a decision. She opened the pantry and took out a couple of potatoes, a tomato, and some powdered broth. Though she didn't have much, she could make a simple soup. She reheated the pot, chopped the potatoes, and put everything to boil. It didn't take her more than 20 minutes to finish. She took some of the day's bread she had brought from the bakery and wrapped it in a clean napkin. "I'm going out for a moment, Tomas," she said, looking for her coat on the rack. "Where are you going?" asked the boy, setting the truck aside. "To take some soup to the neighbor across the street. I won't be long, okay? Stay here and don't open the door." "You're taking food to the lady who lives alone?" "Yes." "Is that okay with you?" Her son nodded with a small smile, seeming a bit intrigued by what his mother was doing. Clara kissed him on the forehead and stepped out into the cold night wind. She crossed the street slowly, careful not to slip on the damp stones. The light from a street lamp illuminated Doña Elena's gate. which looked even larger and more mysterious under the shadows. When she reached the door, she felt a knot in her stomach. What if the old woman didn't want to see her? What if she took the gesture as an intrusion? But something inside her told her she had to try. She knocked gently on the door. The knock echoed in the stillness of the street, but there was no answer. She stood there for a few seconds, holding the pot tightly against her chest. Just as she was about to turn around, she heard slow footsteps on the other side. The door opened with a creak, and Doña Elena's figure appeared in the doorway. She was a slender woman, with silver hair tied in a low bun and a grey shawl covering her shoulders. Her blue eyes, as clear as the winter sky, studied Clara with a mixture of surprise and caution. "Good evening. I'm Clara. I live across the street," she said, feeling her voice tremble slightly. "I made soup and thought you might like some." The old woman's face remained serious for a moment, but then a slight smile softened her features. "How kind," she said in a low but warm voice. "Come in, dear. It's far too cold for you to be out there." Clara stepped in slowly, and the door closed behind her with a soft echo. The inside of Doña Elena's house was surprisingly different from what Clara had imagined. Though the exterior looked neglected, the home inside was immaculate. The dark wooden antique furniture gleamed as if it had just been polished, and the walls were decorated with paintings that looked like they had been made by expert hands. A soft scent of lavender floated in the air, and a table lamp lit the space with a warm, dim light. Compared to her small apartment, with walls that had lost some of their yellow paint over the years and a kitchen that barely fit a wobbly table and a barely functioning stove, that house seemed like a mansion to her. "You can leave the soup on the table," said the woman, pointing to a small dining area that had only an embroidered tablecloth and an empty plate. Clara nodded, still feeling a bit out of place. She carefully placed the pot and opened the napkin containing the bread, arranging it next to the soup as if she were serving a banquet. "I hope you like it. It's something simple," she said, rubbing her hands nervously. Doña Elena observed her for a moment before nodding. "Simple, but very thoughtful. No one has brought me food in years." The young woman smiled, though the old woman's words made her thoughtful. Was it really possible for someone to live that long without anyone showing them a gesture of kindness? While Doña Elena served herself some soup, Clara remained standing, unsure whether she should leave or stay. The elderly woman looked up and raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you going to sit?" she asked, in a neutral but not unfriendly tone. "Oh, I wouldn't want to intrude," Clara replied, raising her hands. "I just came to bring you the soup." "Intrude," Doña Elena repeated, as if evaluating the word. Then she pointed to a chair across from her. "Sit down, dear. At least tell me who you are." Clara hesitated a moment but finally sat down. "I'm Clara Gutierrez. I live across the street, in the yellow apartment." "Ah, yes, I've seen you before," said the elderly woman as she tasted a spoonful of soup, "always walking fast, as if time were chasing you." The girl let out a nervous laugh. "Well, I work at the neighborhood bakery and have a little boy. Sometimes it feels like there aren't enough hours in the day. He's a turn never green, done of reese of that." Doña Elena set her spoon on the plate and folded her hands on the table. "You have a son. What's his name?" "Tomás. He's 7. He's a wonderful kid, although sometimes he drives me crazy with all his energy." The old woman nodded, but her expression darkened slightly. "It must be nice to have someone to keep you company." Clara felt a pang of sadness at those words. There was something in Doña Elena's voice, something in the way she looked at the table, as if seeing a distant memory, that made her realize just how heavy her solitude must be. "And you, Doña Elena?" Clara dared to ask. "Do you live here alone? For a long time now?" The elderly woman replied with a slight shrug. "My husband, Fabian, passed away more than 20 years ago. We didn't have children, and my siblings, well, each went their own way decades ago. Now only this old house remains." Clara didn't know what to say. The woman's words echoed in her mind, and suddenly her own daily burden seemed lighter. At least she had Tomas. That must be hard, she finally said in a soft tone. Doña Elena looked at her with a faint smile, though her eyes seemed sad. Hard, yes, but you get used to it. Silence stops being a bother and becomes an old companion. Silence fell between them for a few moments, broken only by the sound of the spoon against Doña Elena's plate. Clara felt there was much more behind the elderly woman's words, but she didn't want to press her. "How's the soup?" she asked, trying to change the subject. "Delicious," the woman replied sincerely. "I don't remember the last time someone cooked for me." "Thank you, Clara." The simple thank you filled Clara's heart with warmth. "There's no need to thank me, Doña Elena. It was a pleasure." Before the conversation could continue, a sharp knock on the dining room window made them both turn immediately. Clara gave a small jump in her seat, while Doña Elena frowned. "Must be the wind," said the elderly woman, downplaying it. Clara got up and approached the window. From there she could see the street, barely lit by a couple of old lanterns. There was no one, but the noise had been loud enough to unsettle her. "Does this happen often?" she asked, turning to Doña Elena. "From time to time," the woman replied, shrugging. "This house is over 100 years old. There's always something creaking, something banging. I've gotten used to it." The young woman nodded, though she couldn't help but feel uneasy. She shook her head, trying to rid herself of the feeling. "Well, I think it's time for me to go," she said finally. "My son must be waiting for me." Doña Elena stood up carefully, leaning slightly on the table. "Thank you for coming, Clara. It did me good to have some company for a while." The woman gave her a warm smile. "If it's all right with you, I could come back another time. Maybe to have dinner with my son. I'm sure he'd love to meet you." The elderly woman's eyes opened slightly. Surprised. "Dinner?" she repeated, as if the idea were foreign to her. "Of course," said Clara enthusiastically. "We could bring something simple. I wouldn't want to bother you, but I'm sure Tomas would really enjoy hearing the stories you have. Fairy caladidios." Doña Elena hesitated for a moment before nodding with a small smile. "That would be very nice." Clara felt an unexpected warmth in her chest. There was something in that shy smile that gave her the certainty she had done the right thing by knocking on that door. "Then we'll see you soon," she said as she put on her coat. The elderly woman walked her to the door and watched her cross the street back to her apartment. Once Clara disappeared, Doña Elena closed the door and remained for a moment in the silence of the foyer. She gently ran her hand along the doorframe with a pensive expression, as if she were dusting off buried memories. That night, as Clara curled up in bed next to Tomas, she thought about what her mother always used to say. "Kindness costs nothing, but sometimes it changes everything." She didn't know how, but she felt that her life, and Doña Elena's, were about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. The morning chill covered the streets of Puebla with a damp, crisp air. Clara got up early, like every day, to get Tomas ready before taking him to school. The dawn light was just beginning to paint the neighborhood's colorful walls in orange as she poured a cup of instant coffee into her favorite mug, an old ceramic concha with a handle repaired with glue. "Mom, can I take the book you lent me for the homework?" asked Tomas as he carefully packed his school supplies into a backpack, already showing signs of wear. "Of course, but be very careful with it. It's the only one I have on Mexican history," the young woman replied, gently running her hand through his hair. "I'm always careful," said the boy with a smile that lit up the entire room. After dropping Tomas off at school, Clara took a detour on her way to the bakery. Instead of following the main street, she headed toward Doña Elena's house. Although it had only been a couple of days since she brought her soup, something inside her told her she should keep visiting. It wasn't just out of kindness. She had felt something special during their brief conversation, as if they had found common ground in their stories of loneliness and struggle. She knocked gently on the wooden gate, and after a few seconds, she heard slow footsteps, and the sound of the bolt turning. "Good morning, Doña Elena," Clara greeted with a warm smile. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Good morning, Clara," replied the elderly woman, opening the door a little wider. Her face seemed less stiff than the last time, and there was a soft glow in her eyes. "What brings you here so early?" "I was passing by on my way to work and thought I'd say hello." "If you'd like, I can bring you some bread later," Clara offered, lifting a small canvas bag she carried in her hand. "Come in, dear." "It's much too cold to be standing out there," said Doña Elena, stepping aside to let her in. Clara entered and noticed that the inside of the house was just as tidy as before, though the air was cold, as if the radiators didn't work or were never used. "Don't you turn on the heat?" she asked, rubbing her hands. "It's an unnecessary expense. A good blanket and a cup of hot tea are enough," the old woman replied calmly. "Besides, I'm used to it." "And?" The girl frowned. She knew electricity bills could be high, but the idea of Doña Elena living surrounded by cold unsettled her. "Well, at least let me make you some coffee or tea. That way you can warm up," she said, heading toward the kitchen without waiting for an answer. The woman didn't stop her but watched with a mixture of surprise and curiosity as Clara lit the stove and looked through the cupboards for a clean cup. "Are you always this insistent?" she asked with a small smile. "Only when I think someone needs a little care," Clara replied, pouring hot water into a worn-out teapot she had found on the counter. When they returned to the living room with steaming cups of tea, the conversation flowed more easily. Clara talked about her job at the bakery, how much she enjoyed kneading bread, but also how hard it was to live on such a low wage. Doña Elena, in turn, spoke of her youth as a teacher and how she had dedicated her life to teaching literature to generations of students. "I always thought teaching was the noblest way to leave a mark on the world," said Doña Elena, her eyes fixed on one of the paintings hanging on the wall. "I always wanted to study to become a teacher, but I never had the chance," Clara confessed, lowering her gaze to her cup. Between work, debts, and caring for Tomás, that dream ended up far away. Doña Elena looked at her silently but said nothing. Clara wasn't sure whether the old woman understood or simply didn't know what to say. Before she realized it, the time had flown by. Clara quickly apologized, remembering she had to get to the bakery, but before she could leave, Doña Elena stopped her. "Clara, do you really think your dream is that far away?" the woman asked, looking at her intently. The question left Clara speechless. For a moment she wanted to say yes, that it was as far as the stars, but something in Doña Elena's tone made the doubt catch in her throat. "I don't know," she finally said in a faint voice. "I guess it's no longer the time to dream." Doña Elena shook her head but didn't insist. "Maybe someday you'll change your mind," was all she said before saying goodbye. That night, after finishing her workday and picking up Tomás from school, Clara stayed up a little later than usual. Something in Doña Elena's words had sparked something inside her, a spark that had been out for years. While she was making dinner, Tomás came running in from the living room, holding a drawing he had made at school. "Mom, I made this for you," he said, showing her a drawing of the two of them next to a house with a garden full of flowers. "It's beautiful, my love," she replied, hugging him tightly. "Do you think we'll ever have a house like that?" the boy asked innocently. Clara looked at him with tears in her eyes, unable to give a clear answer. But that night, for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine a different future. The sun shone weakly in the winter sky as Clara and Tomás crossed the street toward Doña Elena's mansion. It was the first time Tomás accompanied her, and the boy couldn't stop staring at the house with curious eyes. "She lives alone in such a big house, Mom?" Tomás asked, holding Clara's hand. "Yes, but we're visiting her more often now, so she's not so alone anymore," the young woman replied with a smile. When they knocked on the wooden gate, the familiar sound of Doña Elena's slow footsteps and the bolt turning could be heard. The elderly woman appeared, wrapped in a thick shawl, and her clear eyes softened when she saw them. "What a pleasant surprise," she said, opening the door wide. "You must be Tomas." "Hello, ma'am," said the boy, extending his hand with the seriousness of a little gentleman. Doña Elena let out a light laugh, a sound Clara had never heard before, and shook the child's small hand. "Nice to meet you, Tomas. Come in, please." The inside of the house was slightly warmer than during previous visits, thanks to the fire lit in the living room fireplace. Tomas stood staring at the antique furniture and the bookshelves full of books. There was a magical air in that place, as if it belonged to another era. "Do you like books?" asked Doña Elena, noticing the boy's fascination. "A lot. Mom always reads me stories at night," replied the little one, approaching a table where there was a hardcover book with golden engravings. "That's a good habit," commented the elderly woman with a slight smile. "It's a poetry book. Maybe we can read something after the snack." Clara felt relieved to see that Tomas had adapted quickly to Doña Elena's company. She had brought a corn cake she had baked the night before and some leftover coffee from work. While the elderly woman and the boy sat on the sofa, Clara arranged the living room table with cups and plates. "How's the garden?" Clara asked as she poured the coffee. "Neglected, as always," replied Doña Elena with a sigh. "I haven't had the energy to take care of it." Clara looked through the window, facing the small backyard. There were vines climbing the walls and a couple of fallen flower pots on the ground. She could imagine it full of flowers and colors, but in its current state, it seemed as lonely as the house itself. "We could help you fix it, if you'd like," she offered, turning back to Doña Elena. The elderly woman looked up, visibly surprised. "Do you think?" "It's a lot of work. Tomas and I could come this weekend. It doesn't have to be perfect, but a little life wouldn't hurt," said Clara, smiling. "Yes, Mom and I are good with plants," added Tomas, excited. Doña Elena looked at both of them with a mix of gratitude and doubt. After a moment, she nodded slowly. "All right." "I'd like to see the garden bloom again." The weekend came quickly, and Clara showed up with Tomas at the mansion, armed with borrowed gardening gloves and a small trowel they had found at the market. Doña Elena welcomed them with 2 cups of hot chocolate and led them to the backyard. The young woman knelt on the damp soil, pulling up the weeds that had grown around the flower pots. Tomas ran back and forth, picking up dry leaves and fallen branches. Doña Elena watched from the porch, bundled up in a thick coat and a wool scarf. Though she wasn't actively participating, her face looked more relaxed than usual. "Doña Elena, what flowers would you like to have here?" Clara asked, looking up from the ground. "I've always liked daisies," said the elderly woman with a nostalgic smile. "Fabian used to say they were the happiest flowers." Clara nodded, taking mental note. When they finished cleaning, the garden still looked empty, but no longer abandoned. There was something in the air, a feeling of renewal, as if life were slowly starting to return. "Can we plant daisies, Mom?" asked Tomas, brushing off his dirty hands. "Of course," Clara replied, looking at Doña Elena. "Next time, we'll bring seeds." The old woman smiled, but her gaze darkened slightly. "Thank you for this. You have no idea what it means to me." Clara noticed the emotion in her voice and felt a deeper connection to the elderly woman. She couldn't help but wonder how many memories that garden held, how many happy moments had taken place there before time and loneliness took them away. That night, as mother and son walked back to their small apartment, the boy broke the silence with an unexpected question. "Mom, do you think Mrs. Elena is sad?" Clara looked at him, surprised by his sensitivity. "Why do you say that, sweetheart?" "Because she talks a lot about things that aren't around anymore, like her husband or the garden. It seems like she misses a lot of stuff," said Tomas with a child's sincerity. Clara nodded slowly. "Yes, I think you're right, but that's why we're helping her. Sometimes people need a bit of company to feel better." The little boy thought for a moment before smiling. "Then, we'll keep helping her, right?" "Of course, my love," Clara replied, squeezing his hand. "It's the right thing to do." 8. In the days that followed, Clara noticed a change in Doña Elena. The elderly woman seemed livelier, more interested in the little details around her. She began to talk more about her past life, sharing stories about Fabian and about the years she had spent teaching literature. Tomás, for his part, had grown very fond of her and always offered to help with anything she needed. One day, while Clara was clearing the table after a snack at Doña Elena's house, the old woman looked at her intently from her place on the sofa. "Clara, I've been thinking about something," she said, breaking the silence. "About what?" Clara asked, turning toward her. "That sometimes the things we believe are impossible just need a little help to become real," said the elderly woman, with a sparkle in her eyes. Clara didn't fully understand what she meant, but before she could ask, Doña Elena changed the subject. Still, something in her tone left the young woman with a sense of anticipation, as if something important was about to happen. The midday sun bathed the Puebla neighborhood in golden light that made the rooftops of the colonial houses shine. Clara walked home after finishing her shift at the bakery. In the canvas bag hanging from her arm were a couple of sweet breads left over from the day. They weren't perfect, but she knew Tomás would love them, and maybe she could share them with Doña Elena later. When she arrived at her apartment, she found Tomás in the living room, drawing on a sheet of paper with his box of colored pencils. The boy looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Mom, look what I made," he said, running to her with his drawing. The young woman took the paper and examined it. It was a drawing of the three of them herself, Tomás and Doña Elena, working in the garden. The old woman's house was decorated with colorful flowers, and the sun shone brightly above. "It's beautiful, my love," said Clara, kneeling to hug him. "Shall we take it to Doña Elena?" "Can we?" asked Tomás eagerly. "Of course. She's going to love it," she replied, setting the bag of bread on the table and taking off her apron. After making sure they were both bundled up, mother and son crossed the street to the mansion. Tomás carried the drawing in his hands, protecting it carefully so it wouldn't wrinkle. When they knocked on the door, Doña Elena appeared, as always, with her grey shawl over her shoulders. "Tomás made you a drawing," Clara said before the old woman could ask. The boy held up the sheet proudly, and Doña Elena took it gently, examining it closely. Her face lit up with a sincere smile, and Clara noticed that the old woman's eyes looked brighter, as if they were about to fill with tears. "It's lovely," said Doña Elena, looking at Tomás. "I'm going to hang it on the wall, next to the living room window. That way I can see it every day." Tomás beamed, happy that she liked it. "Come in, dears," said the old woman, stepping aside to let them in. Clara noticed something was different in the house that day. On the dining table, there were a couple of documents neatly stacked and a pen next to them. Doña Elena quickly gathered them up before Clara could take a closer look, placing them in the nearest cabinet. "Getting ready for something, Doña Elena?" Clara asked, with a curious smile. The old woman turned around with a calm but reserved expression. "Just sorting out a few things. You know, important papers that need to be in order." The young woman nodded, though she couldn't help feeling a slight sense of unease. Over the weeks, she had learned that Doña Elena wasn't someone who easily shared her thoughts, but when she did, there was always something deep behind her words. "Can I go to the garden?" asked Tomás, breaking the silence. "Of course, dear," said the woman, opening the back door. The boy ran out to the small patio, now much cleaner thanks to their efforts. Clara and Doña Elena watched him from the window as he picked up some dry leaves the wind had blown in. "He's a wonderful child," commented the old woman with a gentle smile. "Thank you," Clara replied, feeling warmth in her chest. "Sometimes I feel like I can't give him everything he needs, but I do my best." Doña Elena looked at her with a serious expression. "You're an excellent mother, Clara. Don't underestimate yourself. I've seen how you raise him, how hard you work every day. That's what really matters." Clara lowered her gaze, touched by the old woman's words. "It's hard, but he's worth everything." Doña Elena nodded, but her face took on a pensive expression. She seemed to want to say something more, but stopped herself. Several hours later, mother and son said goodbye to Doña Elena, promising to return on the weekend to start planting the daisies. As they crossed the street, Tomás suddenly stopped and looked at his mother with wide eyes. "Mom, do you think Mrs. Elena has a secret?" Clara frowned, surprised by the question. "A secret? Why do you say that?" "I don't know. Sometimes it seems like she's thinking about something important, but she doesn't say it." The boy replied with the honesty typical of his age. The young woman remained silent for a moment, reflecting. It was true that Doña Elena had a reserved air, as if she were always keeping something to herself. But Clara didn't want Tomás to worry. "Maybe, but we all have secrets, don't you think?" she said finally, smiling. "Besides, if she has something important to say, I'm sure she'll tell us when she's ready." Tomás seemed satisfied with that answer and kept walking, holding his mother's hand. Sunday came faster than usual. The day before, they had planted the daisies at Doña Elena's house, and now Clara was focused on tidying up her small home. She was washing dishes in the kitchen, while Tomás played in the living room with a few plastic figures that had withstood the test of time. It was a quiet day. But in Clara's mind, the words Doña Elena had said long ago still echoed. "Maybe someday you'll change your mind." The truth was, she wanted to change her life, study what she was passionate about, but she could barely afford her son's education, and if she wasn't around, who would take care of him? No matter how much she turned the matter over in her head, she couldn't find a solution. Tomás deserved everything, and she would have another life to fulfill her own dreams. Suddenly, a knock at the door pulled her out of her thoughts. Clara dried her hands on her apron and went to open it, surprised to find Doña Elena on the other side. "Doña Elena," Clara said, opening the door wide. "Is something wrong?" The old woman was wrapped in her grey shawl, and though her expression was calm, there was a sense of urgency in her visit. "Sorry to drop by unannounced, dear," said Doña Elena. "But there's something important I need to talk to you about." "Of course, come in," said Clara, stepping aside to let her in. Tomás, seeing the old woman, ran toward her with excitement. "Mrs. Elena, do you want to see my drawings?" "Later, little one. Right now, I need to speak with your mum," she said, gently stroking his head. Clara noticed that Doña Elena was holding an envelope in her hands. It was thick and sealed with a red ribbon, giving it a formal air that made her nervous. "Please, have a seat," Clara said, pointing to one of the chairs at the table. The elderly woman nodded and sat down carefully, placing the envelope on the table as if it weighed more than it appeared. Clara sat across from her, her heart pounding. "Clara, I want to thank you for everything you've done for me these past weeks." Doña Elena began, her gaze fixed on the envelope. "Your company and Tomás's have brought a light into my life I never thought possible." "You don't need to thank me," Clara said quickly. "We're happy to have you as a friend." "It's more than that, dear," said the old woman, lifting her gaze to meet Clara's eyes. "You and Tomás have changed my life, and I want to do something to change yours too." Clara frowned, confused. "I don't understand." Doña Elena slid the envelope toward her. "Open it. Things will be clearer. Nose of fast first to nose of velamate." Clara took the envelope with trembling hands and carefully opened it. Inside she found several documents, and as she looked through them, her eyes widened in surprise. "What is this?" she asked, barely able to believe what she was seeing. "It's the deed to my house," Doña Elena explained, her voice calm but firm. "I want it to be yours." Clara let the papers fall onto the table as if they burned her hands. "No, I can't accept this. It's too much." "It's not too much, Clara," Doña Elena insisted, leaning in a little closer. This house is no longer what I need. It's large, full of memories, but the space is more than I can handle. What I want now is to know that it'll be in the hands of someone who truly values it. You and Tomas can give this place a life I no longer can. Clara shook her head, unable to process what was happening. Doña Elena, you need this house. You can't just give it to me. Of course I can, replied the old woman with a small smile. And it's not a gift, it's an act of gratitude. I've lived more than 80 years and seen the best and worst in people. What you've given me, that warmth, that feeling of belonging, has no price. And I want to give something back. Clara fell silent, unable to find the right words. She looked at Tomas, who was watching them from the living room, unaware of the full meaning of what was going on, but clearly happy to see Doña Elena. I don't... Clara began, but Doña Elena raised a hand to stop her. You don't have to decide right now, the old woman said gently. Take your time, think about it. But I want you to know there's no one else I'd rather entrust this place to. That night, after putting Tomas to bed, Clara sat alone at the small kitchen table, looking at the documents Doña Elena had left behind. The idea of accepting such a gift overwhelmed her, but it also stirred something within her: hope. For years, she had lived day by day, worrying about the next rent payment, the books Tomas needed for school, the new shoes she couldn't afford. But now, before her, was the possibility of a different future. However, accepting it also meant facing her own fears. How could she ever thank Doña Elena for something so immense? She had never wanted to accept help from others, not wanting to owe anyone anything. While she gave without hesitation, she knew not everyone gave without expecting something in return. But the woman seemed sincere, and she had become a friend. The first light of dawn slipped through the worn curtains of the apartment. She had stayed up all night, torn between gratitude and fear. Doña Elena's gift was immense, but so was the responsibility. Finally, as she looked at Tomas sleeping peacefully, his steady breathing gave her an unexpected clarity. She had to make a decision not just for herself, but for her son. At sunrise, Clara crossed the street with the envelope under her arm. She knocked firmly on the wooden gate, and Doña Elena opened it shortly after. The old woman looked at her curiously, as if she already knew something important was about to happen. "Good morning, dear," she greeted softly. "Good morning, Doña Elena." "Of course. Come in." The young woman stepped into the foyer, where the morning sunlight illuminated the old photographs hanging on the walls. The scent of lavender was still a constant in the home, as if it were soaked into every corner. The old woman led her into the living room, where the two sat face to face. Clara placed the envelope on the table and slid it back toward Doña Elena. "I can't accept this," she began, but before the old woman could interrupt her, she raised a hand. "At least, not like this." Doña Elena frowned but said nothing. Clara took a deep breath and continued. "This house is your home, your refuge. I couldn't simply take it and leave you elsewhere. I've thought about this a lot, and the only way I could accept your gift is if you stay here too with us." The old woman remained silent, looking at Clara with a mixture of surprise and something else she couldn't identify. "I don't want you to be alone, Doña Elena. This place is too big for me and Tomas, but it would be perfect if we lived together. We could take care of you, and you could help us build a real home here." "Clara, the old woman began, but her voice broke slightly. She lowered her gaze to her hands resting in her lap. "Please," Clara insisted, leaning forward. "This house has already brought us together, but I can't accept it if it means separating you from your own home. Living together would be best for all of us." There was a long silence, broken only by the soft ticking of an old wall clock. Finally, Doña Elena looked up, and Clara saw tears in her eyes. "You know," said the elderly woman, with a faint smile, "I've always been a woman of few words, but you've managed to disarm me. I never thought I'd find a family at this point in my life. 40 years 2000 to the tenure. She took a moment to wipe her tears with a handkerchief from her pocket. "All right, Clara, I accept your condition. We'll live together." The young woman felt an immense weight lift from her shoulders. Her eyes also filled with tears, but this time they were of relief and joy. "Thank you, Doña Elena." The old woman smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't thank me, dear. This is a gift for me too." That same afternoon, while Clara and Tomas organized their few belongings to move into the mansion, Doña Elena decided to share something she had kept secret. When Clara returned to the house with a box under her arm, she found the old woman in the living room, holding an album of old photographs. "Clara, there's something else I want to tell you," she said, pointing to the chair across from her. Intrigued, Clara sat down. "Do you remember when I told you my husband Fabian was a very wise man?" Clara nodded, recalling the love stories the old woman had shared with her. "What I didn't tell you is that he was also very skilled with numbers. Fabian was a successful investor, and over the years, he built a fortune I've never touched, because I didn't know who I was saving it for." Clara's eyes widened in surprise, but she said nothing. "I'm a millionaire, but I've lived modestly because I didn't see any point in spending that money. That's why I was able to offer you this house so easily. I've never cared about material things, and I can buy another, smaller one to live in." Clara began to protest, but the woman stopped her. "I won't do that. I'll honor our agreement. What I want to say is that now that I have you and Tomas, I want to use that money for something that truly matters." Clara was speechless. "Doña Elena, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," said the old woman with a smile. "Just listen. I want to help you fulfill your dreams. I want you to study, Clara. I want Tomas to have the best education possible. That money will be useless to me when I'm no longer here, but for you, it will open a world of possibilities." Clara shook her head, but the tears were already running down her cheeks. "I can't accept so much, Doña Elena. This is too much." Clara," said the old woman, her tone firmer. "This isn't charity. It's an investment in the people I love. Please, let me do this." Clara looked at Doña Elena, then at the photograph of her and Fabian hanging on the wall. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to say anything more. 5 years later, Doña Elena's mansion was unrecognizable. Daisies filled the garden, and the sound of children's laughter echoed constantly in the air. Clara had finished her studies and was now a literature teacher at a secondary school. Tomas, for his part, was about to finish elementary school and already dreamed of becoming an engineer. Doña Elena lived her days surrounded by love and activity. Though her steps were slower and her hair whiter, her spirit was more vibrant than ever. The house, which had once been a symbol of loneliness, was now a warm and lively refuge. One spring afternoon, as the three shared a cup of tea in the garden, Tomas looked at Doña Elena with a mischievous smile. "Did you know Mom says you're our guardian angel?" The old woman let out a laugh while Clara blushed slightly. "Oh, really?" said Doña Elena, looking at Clara with bright eyes. "Well, it's true," admitted the young woman, shrugging. "You gave us everything, Doña Elena. You're our guardian angel and our family." The woman took Clara's hand tenderly. "You are my angels." As the sun began to set, the three remained there, surrounded by the scent of flowers and the warmth of mutual companionship. Kindness, after all, had changed their lives forever. And so, dear friends, we reach the end of this story. I loved sharing it with you. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like so I can keep bringing you stories of kindness, love, gratitude, and hope. Leave me a comment if you liked it. Sending you a hug. See you in the next story.